The prospect of life on other planets is tantalizing to more than just science fiction fans. For astrophysicist and planetary scientist Sara Seager, what's in the night sky became a life's work. But when tragedy struck her family, it also framed a search for meaning here on Earth. Her recent book, The Smallest Lights in the Universe, a memoir, tells that story. Sara Seager teaches at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and she joins us now from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it's a great pleasure to have you, I will say, back on this program, because you and I first met 10 years ago when you were on this show. So hi again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Not at all. Before we get to the memoir, I do want to start with a recent news development and get your take on that, because last month, after traveling nearly 1 million miles, the James Webb Space Telescope arrived in its new home. And let me start with, what is the importance of this event for you, given what you do for a living?
Well, it's huge. It's basically our next Hubble, but it's way more powerful. And, you know, the Canadians have an instrument on this. Most astronomers around the globe are counting on the Webb telescope to move us to the next level in this entire field of astronomy.
So what does this let you do that the Hubble couldn't do?
Well, for me personally, it lets us study atmospheres of exoplanets, planets orbiting stars other than the sun, in way more detail than ever before. That's what it will enable.
I'm going to throw a couple of nicknames at you here, because I know you've heard this before. The astronomical Indiana Jones. I've seen you referred to that way. Okay, what's the Ark of the Covenant, in which case, if I can torture the metaphor a little further, that you are looking for?
Well, the Ark of the Covenant we're looking for is another planet that has the right conditions for life, that we may even see signs of life on.
And, you know, you're extraordinarily, I know you get this question all the time, but you seem to be extraordinarily hopeful that that's going to happen in your lifetime. How come?
Well, I'm going to have to revise that in a moment, but how come? Because we know there are exoplanets out there. Planets are incredibly common. It appears that, you know, every star has planets. Rocky worlds of the kind, you know, rocky worlds are very common as well. And as we put new sophisticated telescopes in the sky, we can take it a step further. So, you know, the ingredients for life are everywhere we look in astronomy. And as long as we have a planet with water, there's really no reason why life shouldn't start there.
And the distinction between a planet and an exoplanet is what?
Well, an exoplanet is a subset of a planet. A planet is something in our own solar system: Mercury, Venus, even Earth, Mars, that orbits our sun. But, you know, we usually forget this, but every star in the sky is a sun. And each of those suns also have planets. And we call them exoplanets.
Gotcha. Okay, let's go back. We're going to look into your memoir now, and I want to take you back to the time when you were 10 years old. And it's a starry, starry night in central Ontario, eastern Ontario. You're at Bon Echo Provincial Park, a place you love, a place I went to summer camp at, my dad went to summer camp at, and you look up in the sky and you see the stars. And apparently it was a life-changing moment. How?
It was, even if at the time I didn't realize, but I was a city kid. You know, I grew up in the inner city in the South Annex, and I didn't know about stars, you know, only through books or remember the McLaughlin Planetarium?
Mm-hmm.
So when I got a chance to go out there with my dad and a babysitter and my siblings, I don't know why, what possessed me to walk out in the middle of the night. And I must have been so lucky because it was a moonless night, there were no clouds. And I looked up literally for the first time ever, and wow, there were so many stars. I just, you know, I almost stopped breathing because I just didn't imagine that such a magnificent vista existed.
Let's do an excerpt from the book here. Why stars instead of horses, or boys, or hockey, you write? I don't know. Maybe it's because the stars are the antithesis of darkness. Stars are light. Stars are possibility. They are the places where science and magic meet, windows to the worlds greater than my own. Stars gave me the hope that I might one day find the right answers. When I think of the stars, I feel an almost physical pull. I don't just want to look at them, I want to know them, every last one of them, a star for every grain of sand on Earth. I want to bask in the hundreds of millions of suns that shine in the thousands of billions of skies in our galaxy alone. Stars represent more than possibility to me, they are probability. On Earth, the odds could seem stacked against me, but where you are changes everything. Each star was, and still is, Another chance for me to find myself somewhere else, somewhere new. First of all, that's beautifully written. Well done. Second of all, what do you think, like you're 10 years old, what was the something else at age 10 you thought you were looking for at the time?
Well, of course, we never really know about, especially when we're kids and our life is so limited. My life was pretty negative at the time, I'd say. The South Annex was, I think it's all gentrified now, but it was not a very nice place. My parents were divorced. Like I had in my personal opinion, a very evil stepfather at home. So something else was just something better, something mysterious, just something, for lack of a better word, grand. I mean, something mysterious and big. Just like the possibility that there's more to life than your everyday mediocre existence, although I'm sure I couldn't articulate that at the time.
Right. If I say sour cream and onion chips to you, what does that evoke?
Well, there's a story in the book of what it evokes is that when I was a little kid, before my parents were divorced, we went to a Montessori school in Richmond Hill. And to get there, and when my parents got divorced and my mother moved to the inner city, we still went to that school for a couple of years, even though it was so far away. And I don't know if people would do this today, but my brother being 7 or 8 years old, me a year younger, sister a couple of years younger, we would take the subway all the way from, think of the Wellesley subway station in Toronto, all the way to Finch. And then we had to take a go bus. And so on the subway, my brother would always try to save money. And once in a while, buy us some sour cream and onion chips. And it was like the best thing ever. You
were, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a troublemaker when you were a young kid. And there's a school just north of this studio called St. Clemens where you ended up for a little while. How'd that go?
Well, it didn't go well. And I don't want to say anything publicly bad about St. Clemens. I'm sure it's changed by now. But what happened was I applied to like every private school in Toronto. My dad thought I should go to a private school. I know I aced all the entrance exams. I was like a super smart kid. I was terribly awkward socially. I don't know why, but I didn't get admitted to any of these schools, but I know I aced all the exams. So the one school that let me in, my dad wanted me to go to, which was strange because I was raised Jewish. And this school was quite religious actually. And it's the only time I ever got in trouble at school, but they had a lot of rules that really were made no sense. Like if you want to use logic, like I had to travel all around the city since I was 7 years old, going out to Richmond Hill on the subway and bus. But at this particular school, for example, if you were a certain age, you weren't allowed to cross the street. So I took the subway and bus to get there. But when I got there, I was trapped. Like that made no sense. So I would, break all the rules. And it just seemed a school like where they really damp stuff down. Like a girls' school should be encouraging girls to take risks, to be bold, to try new things. And they seem to be doing the opposite. And I think me showing up and breaking all the rules somehow inspired the other girls. And things got really out of control because the other girls were bad. I never did anything seriously wrong, and some of the other ones did. And then everything got blamed on me. And then I had to leave the school.
Sounds like the opening chapter, though, of a good story of a good rabble-rouser. Is that how you saw yourself?
Like I didn't really, because I really just minded my own business and did what I thought was right.
We should clarify, when you say it was a religious school and you were Jewish, it was not a Jewish school. It was an Anglican school.
It wasn't a Jewish school. So for example, I asked, since I'm Jewish, can I please skip the religious class? Because you had to take religion. And some of it was about, I don't remember the details now, but Jesus. And as you know, for Jews, we don't believe in Jesus. So it made no sense that I would be taking that class. But they said, no, I have to take the class. And there was, a lot of things like that.
The chafing at authority.
Chafing at authority, right. So I don't want to make the school look bad right now because I don't know where the school is at. But back then, yes, it was chafing at authority. Because if you've been given that kind of freedom where you're traveling all around the city as a small child, you can't have authority telling you what to do. I think that's kind of what it boils down to.
Right. Let's talk about another one of those, forks in the road. You go one way, your life turns out one way, you go another way. That's what happened to you. You're 15, you make plans to go skating with some buddies. You cancel your plans. Instead, you decide to go to a lecture at the University of Toronto. Different fork in the road. What happened as a result?
Well, let's talk about what happened leading up to that. There was an amazing event happen. A star exploded, a big, huge explosion called a supernova. And it wasn't like an explosion that did anything to us here on Earth, but an astronomer from the University of Toronto who was working in Chile on the mountain, he noticed a star where there wasn't one before. Like, imagine that.
That's pretty
And
cool.
yeah, it's amazing actually. It really struck me because all these stars, they're so far away. It's not like it's not like turning on a light bulb in your house and someone outside notices something's different. It's like major, major amounts of energy have to be put out there. So the fact that someone could see that and there was something new and it was being celebrated in a way that I'd never seen science celebrated before. So I went to Convocation Hall. This is a hall that holds like 2,000 people, and it was packed. And there were like a lot of people giving speeches, and it really struck me about making discoveries and the joy of the night sky. It stayed with me.
Changed your life.
It did. After that, I became an astronomer, like as a hobby, even though I was only 15.
Now, not everybody who's watching us will have heard of St. Clement's School, but I bet a lot more people will have heard of Jarvis Collegiate because it's been around for a very long time. It's a very well-known school in downtown Toronto. And you write it was the perfect school at which to be a loner, which is how you described yourself. How come?
Well, I was one of those kids, first of all, who never fit in. Later, I realized, like as an adult, I was one of those late people who got diagnosed with autism. But at the time, I was super, super awkward. And one of the things at that school is it didn't seem to matter because there wasn't like, you know, movies, there's like the popular kids or the football team and the cheerleaders. I don't think we had a football team or cheerleaders, but there wasn't really anything like that. You know, people could kind of keep to themselves. There were so many immigrants. Kids would show up from all over the world and not speak English for a few months until they learned. And so there was really, you could sort of just be yourself and keep to yourself and still get a great education.
Now, since you raised the issue of your diagnosis of autism, let me follow up on that because, of course, I suspect the vast, vast majority of people who get that diagnosis are kids when it happens. How old were you?
Well, I was in my 40s, but it's not so true. Like what you're saying is maybe today, the vast majority are kids. But back then, when I was a kid, when you were a kid, they didn't have all these labels. Like they didn't identify, like think of all the kids who had ADD in your class when you were growing up, right? They probably got in trouble, but they weren't. They were just energetic and couldn't focus. So we didn't have we didn't have dyslexia. You know, people never identified dyslexia. So it's not just autism or dyslexia. It's like tons of things that kids today will get identified with. So I just want you to know, everyone out there, there's so many people this age of 40s, 50s, who look back, they realize they have autism or Asperger's, it's all called the same thing now, and they can get diagnosed or often self-identify looking back. So it is quite common to get diagnosed at this age for people of this generation.
When somebody suggested it to you, though, you didn't exactly welcome the diagnosis, fair to say?
Well, I was just I just thought it was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Like, don't you feel like you know yourself pretty well? It's like that. Like, how could this be true? How could I have some, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are definitely on the spectrum. And sometimes I used to tease them or, you know, like in my own mind, make fun of them. So it was really funny, like ironic in a way. And I just said, no, there's just no way this is possible.
But apparently it is possible, and you came to accept the diagnosis. And how has that helped you better understand your sense of otherness over the previous 4 decades of your life?
Well, it explained a lot, and that was all good, but it's mostly helped me now because with relationships with other people, like we can get into my husband, Charles, later, but even my students, all the people around me, like I now understand why the world moves so slowly for me. My view is like I can talk super fast and be really abrupt and people get really upset, or I can slow down and translate my way of thinking to the way I talk to other people. And it results in people being less upset with me. So that's a good thing. And there's a lot of this back and forth. Like some of the people I mentor, they're like, well, why do I have to adapt to the rest of the world? And it's like, well, if you're the minority, usually you have to adapt. So there's this whole thing. It's as if I want you to imagine for a moment, you only speak a different language and you only think in your native language, but you have to translate everything to English. And when people speak, you've got to translate it all back. So now I do that. And it made my life easier in the way I interact with other people.
Have you asked yourself whether or not you would be who you are, namely one of the world's foremost astrophysicists, had you not been on the spectrum?
I'm grateful to have autism because it enabled me to be where I am. There's like this intensive focus and just an interest in something to the exclusion of almost everything else. And those two things have allowed me to be a great scientist.
I'm going to do a little Psychiatry 101 here and see whether or not this makes any sense. But your relationship with your late husband, Mike, solidified over multiple canoe trips that you two took in the wilderness. And I wonder whether your fascination with the wilderness is comparable to your fascination with the stars and space, because there's not a lot of people in either place.
I think that might be a really good insight. Yes, I would say so.
Well, you didn't mind animals, however, right? You're thinking about becoming a veterinarian at some point? How come you didn't?
I absolutely was, yeah. I love animals. You know, they don't judge you, right? I mean, unless you have a cat, sometimes cats do. But on the whole, the animals, they just, you know, it's just a less complicated relationship. And there's always joy and love and just, yeah.
So why did the stars win out over the animals in terms of your career choice?
I mean, I was in graduate school and I didn't like grad school. Most graduate students turn out to be depressed at, you know, one way or the other. And I was one of those. So I had to contemplate a different career. That's where the veterinarian came in. But I decided to stick with grad school and stick with where I was going. Maybe it was more of an inertia, but it was definitely a true passion deep down that kept me studying.
Okay, let's pursue that. You are looking for planets out there that are the most similar to Earth, in which case they need to have what kinds of qualities?
Well, we so far think they need to have a rocky surface like our Earth and not be a giant planet like Jupiter that has no surface as we know it. We think we need the right we know we need the right temperature so we can have complex molecules that life requires. And there needs to be some kind of liquid, such as water, where chemical reactions can happen to make life occur. So it's really those three things: temperature, rocky surface, water, or some kind of liquid.
When I used to watch Star Trek, we called those Class M planets. Is that basically what you're looking for?
Basically, but they're not called that in real life.
No, that was on TV.
I know.
But having said that, can habitability out there look very different from habitability here?
We want to keep an open mind because it might. For example, even in our own solar system, Jupiter has icy moons that have no atmosphere. They have an icy surface, but beneath that surface, there's water actually. So there could be life swimming around beneath these icy crusts. For exoplanets, you know, the most common type of star out there is very different from our own sun. It's a small, cool, red dwarf star that give off giant repeated flares. So we really don't know yet. We're trying to keep an open mind.
Do you imagine a time, though, when the notion of seeing another planet out there that is habitable for beings like us would be so appealing to so many people that people will want to leave Earth to settle that planet?
Well, you know, want and can are two very different things, right? So there's no doubt in my mind that people will want to go to another planet. Think of even the movies we have. It's not just Star Trek, right? But every couple of years, there's a new movie because people love this idea of being able to travel to another world. It's not in the cards for us now just because the stars are so far away. Any planet orbiting another star is literally many, many trillions of miles away.
Okay, Sara, I want to take you to what is the most heartbreaking part of your book. Your book is extraordinary, and you don't spare a lot of detail in talking about the most awful thing that ever happened to you in your life, which is, of course, the death of your first love, your husband, who died at the age of 40. Pancreatic cancer. You're left alone with two little kids, two sons. And, well, let's start here. I'm sure there was a point at which you asked yourself, can I continue to have the career that I want to have and yet be the mother that I need to be to these two fatherless boys? How did you negotiate all that in your head?
It was really tough, actually. Actually, I was 40, he was 47. And just for the record, my dad had just died, who was also the anchor of my world of pancreatic cancer. And then my first husband, he had a different kind of cancer, but the whole thing is just a disaster no matter how you look at it. I just remember one day just being exhausted. It's like, you know, those 10-minute tasks, they fill up many hours. So I'd be at work all day, then I'd go home and do all the 10-minute tasks. And there were the kids who I wanted to spend more time with. not just physical time, but like my mind was always all over the place. It was just juggling so much. And honestly, I just felt like quitting my job. I was just like, I just don't know if I can keep it all together right now. And I had some friends at the time, my widow friends, and I told them, and you know what I expected them to just say? Look, pick up your socks. Everyone has tough problems. Just get over it. But the funniest thing was they didn't say that. They just said, we support you. You can do great at whatever you want. And so I was really lost for a while.
But you figured it out.
I did figure it out. I did figure it out. I had a lot of people help. I had women, different women at different times, fantastic, now remaining very close family friends, like live at my house in exchange for helping with the kids. You know, I had a housekeeper come a lot. Yeah, it was a hard few years, but I made it.
Because you're a person of science, I can ask you this question, and that is, what would you put the odds at that a woman from...
I should work that out. I've got to work that out now that you've asked me.
Well, no, hang on. This is on something else. What would you put the odds at on a woman who's from Toronto and makes her living in Boston and lives in Concord, Massachusetts, would find the second love of her life in Thunder Bay, Ontario?
Oh, right. That would be really zero, I would say. I put the odds at 0.
Well, it can't be zero because that's what happened to you.
I was on my way to give a talk, to be like a keynote speaker at a weekend-long event run by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. This is a very old, established astronomy organization with chapters all across the country. And I'd gotten my start. Remember when I was 15 and I got interested in astronomy, I joined that organization. And like I went to their meetings in Toronto. And now being so grown up and being an astronomer for my job, it was like a really like an honor for me to be able to go back and talk to them. Now, this meeting in Thunder Bay was a general assembly. So it was open to all the people in all the chapters. Not everyone goes, of course, but like the leadership from each chapter would go and members nearby. And so yeah, it was run out of Thunder Bay. So I was on my way to Thunder Bay, and on the plane, I was like, you know, kind of second guessing while I was going, because even though all I said, it was the long weekend, they hold it over the long weekend in July. I remember I have kids at home, so I had to get my babysitter / family friend to like stay over on the long weekend. So I was on my way there. And then when I got there, I was hosted by a widow. She took me to the opening event, and I was there at the reception, and it was like the movies. I looked across the room. I saw this tall, dark, handsome man. I was just like, wow, who is that man? I have to meet him. And as the weekend went by, like I wasn't meeting him. You know, it was my job to like talk to all the astronomers and hear about all their telescopes. But finally I was able to bump into him, and we had lunch together, and all I could do was think, wow, I finally get to meet this guy.
How long does it take, though, before you stop feeling guilty about the fact that Mike is no longer here and start feeling positive that you can get your life back on track with another person?
Well, it's not so much guilt. You know, I think every widow or widower has a different path. It wasn't so much guilt. I never felt guilty about this because, you know, if it was reversed, I would have wanted him. I would have like insisted for him to get remarried. You know, a lot of people feel very strongly about that, but it was the sadness. You know, the sadness doesn't go away. Like just because I met Charles and got married, that sadness and missing my first husband, Mike, it lasted a very, very long time. You know, it still pops up. Like I'm definitely healed, and whatever word you want to use. But it was many, many years before I was able to, I don't know, I guess, for lack of a better word, fully let go.
You got a MacArthur Fellowship grant. I guess, what do they call those? The Genius Grants or something?
Right.
Okay. And the Globe and Mail calls you for an interview, and they ask you why you left Canada. You're from Canada originally, obviously. You've gone down to the States. And they ask you, why do you feel you have to go to the States? And your answer was, because America is better at fostering greatness. Tell us why Canada is less good at fostering greatness.
Okay, well, I've definitely had time to think about this. And I won't call it fostering greatness per se. I mean, we have Wayne Gretzky after all, right? Like we were able to generate a Wayne Gretzky and many amazing hockey players. And let's ask ourselves, can we in Canada generate other greatness in that way, right? Or, you know, is our culture kind of wanting to make sure that equality dominates over any one individual being singled out for any reason. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
So like when I was growing up, I wasn't like, okay, I'm not bragging here. I just was so smart. I was like way smarter than anyone else. And I was also way bad at so many things. Okay. So why was I allowed to be called like really bad at sports? But I wasn't allowed to be like, okay, this kid is really smart. What can we do for this kid? You know, if I was a great ice hockey player, I'm pretty sure I would have been put into some program and had that like amplified.
Gotcha.
And it's not just Canada. Of course, this happens in the US. It happens everywhere. Some things are recognized and fostered and other things aren't. But if I had to sort of put it all together like that, you know, in America, there's this, it is a bit distasteful, of course, right? It's like me, me, me. I need to just self-promote, get myself ahead, right? But, you know, with everything, there's two sides to every coin, right? So part of this culture here in the US, it pushes that forward. It amplifies things, some bad things, some great things.
Well, let me pick up on that. I don't dispute the comment. I think it's, you know, it's empirically provably true. Having said that, you now live in a country where half the people seem to hate the other half of the people with a level of vehemence that we haven't seen maybe since the days of Vietnam. Some people are suggesting not since 1860. What do you think about that?
It's definitely, it's like traumatic for everyone involved, I would say. And, you know, it was probably there for a very long time, right? It's just now being allowed to kind of come out and really cause a lot of trouble. And it makes me incredibly uneasy. And I'd say most people.
Now you're
it's a very, very tough thing.
Yeah, you're so ensconced right now in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Do you ever imagine things becoming so disruptive, so violent, so frightening in the United States that you feel you might have to leave?
Definitely. I mean, it's, well, the thought of returning to Canada permanently is always with me. I'll just put it that way.
Okay. Let's finish up on this, Sara, because I do love your answer to the question which you get asked all the time, which is, do you think we're alone in the universe? And your answer is, do the math. What does that mean?
Well, the math means that, you know, when we look in the night sky, depending on where you live, you can see 10 or hundreds or maybe a few thousand stars. But in our Milky Way galaxy, there are actually hundreds of billions of stars, you know, a number that's so huge we can barely contemplate it. But, you know, in our universe, we actually have hundreds of billions of galaxies. So if you think of hundreds of billions of stars in each of the hundreds of billions of galaxies, and if most stars have planets and rocky planets are common, then the chance for life starting on any planet out there, it's just so huge. That's what do the math means, is just think of the endless number of stars and planets and the possibilities in the universe.
It's hard to imagine it's just us out there, right?
It is hard. It's very hard to imagine it's just us. You know, right now, we won't be able to meet life or discover it unless it's actually right up close to us, right around a nearby star. So there is life out there somewhere, I'm convinced of that. But whether we can find and identify it anytime soon, we have to get lucky. Nature would have to have given us life somewhere very near to us.
How depressed will you be if you spend your entire life looking for this and don't find it?
Well, you know, I think everyone, when we get to a certain age, we do realize that our goal might not be something we can meet. So in that case, I have to be satisfied with all the discoveries I have made and that this is a generational project. So if it's not me, it'll be someone in the next generation. And I'm training those people. Okay, if it's not me, it can be someone that I've trained that I'm helping to be able to make it happen someday.
That would be cool, but it'd be better if it were you, right?
Well, I'd love to be the one who makes the big discovery. And we just have to be lucky, you know, we have to be able to find life around a nearby star, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
In which case, Sara Seager, I wish you luck.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
The Smallest Lights in the Universe is Sara Seager's extraordinary book. We are happy to put it on our bookshelf here in the studio and hope others will as well. Take care, Sara, and thank you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.